For such a renowned romance novelist, the author currently has 5 ex-husbands. Hello, and welcome to the 24th installment of Frasier Fridays, where all the salads are tossed and all the eggs are scrambled. Today, we're looking at the 24th episode of Frasier and the Season 1 finale, entitled My Coffee with Niles. The title of this episode is a reference to the 1981 Wallace Shawn film, My Dinner with Andre. This is a film I've tried watching several times and never gotten through. Its plot involves 2 old friends having dinner and catching up after not seeing each other for several years. It's gotten quite a bit of critical praise, but my eyes have just kind of glazed over every time I've tried to watch it. I actually first heard of it after I saw the Community episode, My Dinner with Abed, which covers similar grounds. Get it? Coffee grounds? With Jeff and Abed. My Coffee with Niles originally aired on May 19th, 1994, right before the Seinfeld season finale for this broadcast season. It pulled in a strong 29.7 million viewers, well above the season average, and coming in at the 5th highest episode of the season, with over 1.5 million viewers more than the pilot episode. Seinfeld still won the day with 30.1 million viewers this week, but that's a mere 0.4 million viewer difference. A very nice way to end the season for Frasier. Frasier has still managed only to beat the behemoth that is Seinfeld once, and that's with the episode where Lilith came back. It will be interesting to see if we can beat Seinfeld again next time we have a Cheers guest star. With production code 124, this episode was always meant to be the season finale, and with good reason. It's a James Burrows directed episode, and is written by David Angel and Peter Casey. These two also wrote the pilot episode, and along with David Lee, are the reason for the call letters KACL. Angel has a really interesting but tragic death I want to discuss, so let's focus on Casey first. Casey got his start right with David Lee. They started out writing for the Jeffersons, where they also became producers. From there, Casey would go on to write a handful of episodes for every show he produced. Casey acted as a producer on Cheers, The Pursuit of Happiness, Wings, Encore, and of course Frasier. Interestingly, with the exception of The Jeffersons and Cheers, Casey is credited as a creator on every show he's worked on. Casey won a total of 7 Emmys, 5 of which were for Frasier. He donated all 5 of these Emmys to the San Francisco State University, where they are now on display in the Creative Arts Building. David Angel started a little sooner than Casey and Lee, but prior to his death, his career pretty much followed the same trajectory. Angel didn't start his career as a writer or producer. He started out in the Army, then he worked for an engineering firm, and following that, an insurance firm. In 1977, he successfully sold his first script to Hollywood and moved to California. The script he sold was for an episode of Annie Flynn. From there, it took another 5 years of submitted scripts before he sold his second script for an episode of Archie Bunker. After that, he joined the Cheers writing staff in its second year, and along with Casey and Lee, would work on The Pursuit of Happiness, Wings, and Encore. Angel unfortunately passed in 2001. He was aboard American Air Flight 11 on September 11, 2001, which was the first plane to hit the World Trade Center. Both Angel and his wife lost their lives that day. This episode starts out with the elevator and the Space Needle, tying it up with the red blinking dot at 7 uses apiece. Both the Nothing Happening intro and the Lights All Over the City have made 5 appearances, giving us something of a pattern. I know each season sees a different color logo. All of Season 1 was blue, Season 2 will be red, and I'm predicting we'll get some more of those new intros starting then. We start out the episode with the only title card of the episode, and it's just a repeat of the episode's title. Normally, this would feel a little out of place and wrong, but given how this episode plays out, I think it works quite well here. The episode starts out with Niles talking on his very expensive cell phone, while Frasier meets him at Cafe Nervosa. When Frasier arrives, the brothers order coffee from Lukhari, making her second appearance as a waitress, and after how Frasier treats her here, look, as far as I'm concerned, she's more than justified to be a little sassy with him going forward. Niles gives us two more tidbits about Maris here. The first is hardly surprising, but like Niles, she has a cell phone. Again, remember this is 1994. Cell phones were not that common yet, and certainly not common enough that everyone would have them. So I find it really interesting that it just slides so calmly into the conversation between the brothers here. The other thing we learn is Maris reads Danielle Steel novels, and I guess I'm just a little surprised Maris would do something so pedestrian. Danielle Steel novels are everywhere, and in my mind they are synonymous with dime store romance. I've never personally read a Danielle Steel novel, and don't have any interest in doing so. But I'm also not her target audience at all. With that said, her target audience loves her. She's written over 200 books and has sold over 800 million copies of her books since she began publishing in 1973. Interestingly, for such a renowned romance novelist, the author currently has 5 ex-husbands. This entire episode takes place in Cafe Nervosa, which is a first for the series. In fact, this is the only episode so far in the series where the studio and Frasier's apartment haven't appeared. Because of this, we get the opportunity to see a lot more of the cafe than we usually do, since there isn't anything else to take up set space this week. It's cool to see all the outside seating, and it's a very nice addition to the set. We also get another Nilesism where he wipes the seat off before sitting down, and Frasier actually comments on it here. An interesting note, and something that's kind of lost in translation to the DVD and streaming versions, but whenever the brothers go to the bathroom here, it's right at a commercial break. So it's implied the length of the commercial break is the time they were in the bathroom. Hence why Frasier says he's in there so long, because he was gone during the longer commercial break. While they're waiting for their coffee, Niles asks Frasier if he's happy. This becomes kind of the main point of the episode. Frasier deflects the answer, and the conversation moves on to Niles' shoes. We don't actually get a real good shot of them, but he says they are $400 Bruno Magli's. David Hyde Pierce actually mispronounced this name during the initial broadcast, and had to dub it over for the home video release. Magli is an Italian luxury leather brand that has been around since the 1930s. Today, their lowest-end shoes cost around $400. Although there are a few that can be had for $300. They're all nice and look about like what you'd expect Frasier and Niles to wear. Although it wouldn't occur for another year yet, the Bruno Magli's would become a much more common term in the pop culture vernacular in the coming year, as they became a major component in the O.J. Simpson trial in 1995. An interesting aside on the O.J. trial, there's a theory that O.J. didn't do it, and the killer was actually his son, who he decided to take the fall for. I only listened to one podcast on this about a year ago, so I don't remember a lot of the details, but it's an interesting theory in any event. While Niles is convincing Frasier, or probably more himself, that he loves his wife and not just her money, he mentions that Maris is something of a musician and plays an auto harp. The auto harp is an interesting instrument and features steel bars to mute all the strings except for the ones the player intends to use. Like the term Kleenex, or apparently Cuisinart, the term auto harp was originally copyrighted, but fell out of copyright after it became synonymous with the instrument. Since the whole episode takes place in the cafe, it's inevitable we'd have to have our regulars start dropping by. And Roz is the first one to appear. After showing up on the radio with her 2 weeks in a row, Niles seems to finally know who Roz is, so that's a nice bit of development from his character. Roz says she's here to meet her date, Andy Winslow, We actually do get a look at Andy later in the episode, although he doesn't have any lines, and like the security guards last week and Gil's producer, he's totally uncredited, which is frustrating as no one online seems to know the actor's identity. This episode also shows us that the Cranes aren't the only members of the cast to enjoy some of the brand name things life has to offer. Before she goes in to see her date, Roz pulls out a compact to check herself over, and it's a Chanel. Chanel is probably the most famous luxury bag and makeup line in the world. And I always think of Emma Roberts' character, Chanel, #1, from Scream Queens when I hear the name. Anyway, if you want a compact with presumably powder, just like the one Roz has here, you can get one today on Chanel's website for $58. It's not near as expensive as Niles' shoes, but it's still a heck of a lot for makeup. After Roz departs, we get a couple funny lines from Niles, while him and Frasier discuss the possibility of Frasier and Roz dating. The first is Niles refers to Roz's date as her coffee companion. And the second is Niles' description of Roz's attractiveness as comely in a back alley sort of way. Casey and Angel were on fire with the Nihilisms here, and I laughed out loud at that second line. My favorite Nilesism is still yanking my giggle chain, but both of these are great as well. It begins raining, and our other 3 stars arrive at the cafe just as Frasier and Niles have moved inside. This leads to what is our only real goof of the episode, and it's a factual one. Daphne refers to her umbrella as a bumbershoot, which is a term that I'd never heard before, but sounds very British. Apparently it's not British at all, and it's only an American slang term, combining the terms umbra from umbrella into bumper, and the shoot from parachute, since an open umbrella looks kind of like a parachute. The proper British slang term for an umbrella is a brolly. Lukhari tells Martin dogs aren't allowed in the cafe, and he plays off that he's blind, so Eddie can stay. It's a delightful bit of acting from Mahoney, and good fun all around. We also get a second line from Daphne about buying her beans at Cafe Nervosa. This was mentioned before when Daphne showed up at the cafe, and is a nice bit of continuity. We get 2 good lines from Martin while he's pretending to be blind. The first is he refers to toast sweat, not a term I'd heard before, but one we all know exactly what he's talking about. It's a really good term, and one I'm going to start using in my personal life going forward. The other comment Martin makes is on the price of the coffee, which is $1.50 for the cup. If I happen to buy coffee on the run, it's generally from a gas station, so it's in the $1 to $2 range for me. Granted, this episode is almost 30 years old, so this got me wondering about coffee prices. Obviously, Cafe Nervosa is fictional, but a cup of coffee at Starbucks seems to run in the $3 to $6 range. Adjusted for inflation, $1.50 is $3.11 today. So a plain cup of coffee at Cafe Nervosa would have been about the same as a cheap cup at Starbucks. David Hyde Pierce gets a couple of great reaction shots in this week. First, with one of his patented longing stares at Daphne when she talks about putting her feet behind her head. Then his best reaction yet, when Frasier straight up asks him if he's in love with Daphne. This leads to some interesting conversation, where Niles admits he would love to have an affair with Daphne, and asks Frasier if he's allowed to. This line also earned an audible laugh from me. A while ago, I predicted we'd get a kiss between Daphne and Niles by the end of the season to mirror Sam and Diane in Cheers. Obviously, that didn't come to pass here. But this does feel like a step forward. With a Midwinter Night's Dream, it seemed like Niles had made his choice to stay with Maris, and it was clear he does love her. But here, we see that he also still has a lot of unresolved issues with his infatuation toward Daphne. Roz returns for another scene to bemoan things not working out with Andy, and how her dating life is going. I've complained before about Roz not understanding religion, seeming off given her Midwestern upbringing, but we get another misunderstanding religion line here. In this case, it's her thinking the word ecumenical applies to any religion, it doesn't. The term is strictly for Christian denominations working together. I guess this makes misunderstanding religion a part of her character going forward. After Roz leaves, the episode starts to wind down. And we have an interesting line about Frasier getting old, buying a funny little dog, and moving in with Frederick. I'm curious how much of that came to pass in the new series. Our Koda scene finds Frasier pulling something gross out of his coffee, but I'm really not sure what it is. My best guess is a tea bag, but for the effects of the Koda, all that really matters is it's something gross. The Koda works well, but I sort of wish they'd skipped the Koda this week, as the ending felt perfect for a season finale, and would have been a nice closing shot for the year. One thing to note here is the ending song has a new line at the end, where Grammer tells us he'll see us next year. Since everything happens in real time this week, there's only 2 ties worn here. One for each brother, and both of them are new this week. Niles' tie is pretty similar to ones he's worn before, but with brighter colors than he usually sports, while Frasier's is a more muted tie than he normally wears. It will be interesting to see if the brothers have all new ties or repeats next season. There are a few quick biographical notes worth discussing here. The first is this episode apparently marks the 1-year anniversary of Frasier being in Seattle. In the pilot, Frasier mentions he's been in Seattle for 6 months. That means the entirety of the first season has taken place over a period of 6 months. The other is, it's mentioned that Martin's birthday was the previous Sunday. Based on future episodes, we know that he must have just turned 61 here, meaning he had Frasier when he was 20. And that's a wrap on season 1. For a season finale, it feels really understated, but it really works for the show. Nothing too much of note happens here, outside of Frasier asking Niles if he loves Daphne. There's no major plot-shaking revelations or status quo changes. There's nothing plotline-wise resolved or set in motion for next season. It's almost a slice-of-life episode, and I loved it. The acting here is top-notch all the way around. Niles MVPs it for reaction shots this week, and everyone else is solid. Roz has a nice character arc here, and going forward, I suspect we're going to see her start to take dating a little more seriously, which seems to be the implication from her comments at the end of this episode. Martin gets to be the one who blows up at his family this week, which is somewhat reminiscent of Dinner Date, but given how much better we know the characters, it really feels like a good character beat for him. Daphne doesn't get much of a character beat this episode, other than to be oblivious to Niles' affections, but that's fine. The Crane family is the heart of the show at this point, and all 3 of them get to shine here. As we've discussed in the past, no matter how well paced, there's just no way to get an episode where everyone gets perfect screen time with the size cast we have. Lukhari was fun with her return, although not quite as sassy as I was hoping she'd be. And Eddie sitting in the cafe was great, along with Martin pretending to be blind. Finally, Frasier's answer to the question of if he's happy felt rewarding and well-earned. Is this the perfect finale? No. In my book, there's only 2 perfect season finales. And that's the finale for the 2nd season of Hannibal and the 5th season of Angel. With that said, this episode is easily in my top 10 season finales. A tiny bit more Daphne and Eddie, and the exclusion of the Koda might have pushed it over the edge for me. But as it sits, this is a fantastic episode. It showcases exactly who all the main cast are, perfectly hits some great emotional beats, and has just the right tone for the ending scene. Overall, my Coffee with Niles is a very solid 9.5 out of 10 episode of Frasier.